The Dralethian warcruiser Molten Fist hung in the void, like a jagged shard of forged obsidian, its angular hull bathed in the dull orange glow of its plasma reactors. Commander Dralethian flexed his clawed hands against the command throne, the segmented plates of his exoskeleton shifting with the motion. His 4 eyes, 2 forward facing for precision, 2 wide set for peripheral awareness, tracked the tactical display before him. The humans had been given their final warning. They had ignored it. The Dralethian High Command had assured him this would be a simple enforcement action. The Treaty of Soul was clear. No species was permitted to militarize beyond the agreed upon limits. Yet the humans had done exactly that. Their orbital shipyards hummed with activity. Their fleets expanded. Their weapons grew more monstrous with each passing cycle. The other galactic powers had dismissed them as reckless upstarts, too primitive to be a true threat. Dralethian knew better. He had fought them before. "Vashdor," he rumbled, his voice a deep vibration that resonated through the metallic chamber. Final scan results. The scientist, his carapace marked with the copper inlays of a senior analyst, tapped at the holographic interface. The data streamed across the display. Ship classifications, weapon signatures, shield densities. The numbers did not lie. "Commander," Vashdor said, his voice tight, "their defenses are not what we anticipated." Dralethian's mandibles twitched. He had expected this. Humans never did the expected. The display zoomed in on the human battle group stationed near Mars. Their ships were blocky, utilitarian, lacking the sleek elegance of Dralethian engineering. But what they lacked in refinement, they made up for in sheer, brutal functionality. Their armor was layered, redundant. Their weapons were not just powerful, they were adaptive. Railguns that could recalibrate mid-salvo. Plasma lances that pulsed in irregular frequencies to bypass shield harmonics. And then there were the missiles. So many missiles. "Analysis," Dralethian demanded. Vashdor hesitated, a rare show of uncertainty. "Their primary dreadnought, the Titan's Wrath, carries a payload we have not seen before. The warheads are not standard antimatter. They are something else." Dralethian exhaled through his secondary vents, a slow, controlled release of frustration. Of course they were. Humans had a habit of weaponizing the impossible. "Estimate engagement outcome," he said. Vashdor's claws flicked across the display, running simulations. The projections flickered. Orange for Dralethian victory, red for catastrophic loss. The numbers settled. 63% chance of mission failure. Dralethian's spine stiffened. That was not a margin. That was a death sentence. He had fought humans before. He had seen what happened when they were cornered. "Open a channel to High Command," he ordered. The comm officer hesitated. "Commander, protocol dictates we proceed with enforcement." The humans were warned. "I do not care about protocol," Dralethian growled. "I care about not leading my crew into a slaughter." The bridge fell silent. A moment later, the holographic visage of High Overseer Krazak materialized before him, his molten red eyes burning with disapproval. "You are delaying, Dralethian." "The humans are not complying," Dralethian said. "They are waiting," Krazak scoffed, the sound like grinding metal. "For what?" "Their pitiful fleet is outnumbered. Their technology is inferior. This is a show of force, nothing more." Dralethian's claws dug into the armrests of his throne. "You did not fight in the Sirius campaign," he said quietly. Krazak's mandibles twitched. "Irrelevant." "No," Dralethian said. "It is everything." He had been there. He had seen human desperation firsthand. They did not surrender. They did not retreat. They adapted, and then they struck back. "High Overseer," Dralethian said, his voice low, "I strongly recommend we withdraw and renegotiate terms." Krazak's eyes flared. "You are relieved, Commander." The transmission cut. Dralethian sat motionless. Then he turned to his crew. "Battle stations." The Molten Fist powered its weapons. Across the void, the humans did the same. The first missile streaked toward them, not from the Titan's wrath, from behind. Dralethian's spines flared in alarm. They had ambushed them, of course they had. The humans had ignored the treaty. Now they would make the Dralethians beg for terms. The missile struck the molten fist's aft shields like a hammer against an anvil, its detonation rippling through the Dralethian warship's segmented armor. The impact sent a shudder through the command deck, rattling the copper-plated consoles and casting flickering orange reflections across the dark metal walls. Dralethian's claws tightened around the armrests of his throne, his spines flaring in instinctive alarm. They had been flanked. The humans had not simply waited for the Dralethians to fire first. They had already moved, already positioned unseen forces in the void. It was a tactic Dralethian recognized, one he had witnessed before, in the burning wreckage of the Sirius campaign. His secondary officer, Vashdor, hissed through his mandibles, his 4 crimson eyes darting across the tactical display. High Commander, we have multiple contacts emerging from the asteroid belt. Small, fast, no energy signatures until now. Dralethian exhaled through his nasal vents. The scent of molten alloy and plasma fumes thickened the recycled air. Stealth frigates. Human ships were never unarmed, never passive. They did not announce their presence. They did not wait for honor, bound declarations of war. They struck first. Evasive maneuvers. Dralethian ordered, his voice a low, grinding growl. Divert power to rear shields. Bring the plasma lances online. The molten fist groaned as its massive engines flared, the ship's angular hull twisting in the void. The human vessels, sleek, predatory things with matte, black plating, were already closing in, their railguns charging. Dralethian's mind flashed back to the Iron War, to the first time he had faced humans in battle. They had been underestimated then, too, 20 cycles ago. The Dralethian High Command had dismissed the humans as a fractured, primitive species. Their ships were slow, their weapons crude. When the first skirmishes broke out in the Sirius system, the Dralethians had expected a swift victory. They had been wrong. Dralethian had commanded the Emberclaw then, a destroyer tasked with breaking the human blockade over Proxima Centauri. The human defenders, outnumbered, outgunned, should have crumbled. Instead, they adapted their ships. Once sluggish, had been retrofitted mid-battle, their thrusters burning hotter, their railguns firing faster. Their commanders did not hesitate to sacrifice vessels if it meant luring Dralethian forces into kill zones. And when the Emberclaw had breached their lines, thinking victory assured, the humans had done something unthinkable. They had rammed a crippled frigate into its engines. Dralethian still remembered the shudder of impact. The way the human ship, its hull shattered, its crew dead, had been piloted remotely into his ship's core. The explosion had torn through the Emberclaw's power conduits, leaving it adrift, and then the boarding pods had hit. Human soldiers, clad in reinforced exosuits, their faces hidden behind darkened visors, had stormed the decks. They fought like demons, their weapons crude but brutally efficient. They did not fear death. They did not retreat. They advanced. Dralethian had barely escaped. His ship left a burning husk. That day, he had learned the truth. Humans did not fight for honor. They fought to win. The molten fist's shields flared as another railgun round slammed home, the impact rattling the deck beneath Dralethian's feet. The human frigates were harrying them, keeping them off balance while the Titan's wrath, the massive human dreadnought, powered its main weapons. Vashdor snarled, his claws skittering across the console. Their dreadnought's energy signature is spiking. They're preparing to fire. Dralethian's mandibles tightened. He had seen what human capital ships could do. Full reverse. He barked. Deploy countermeasures. The molten fist's engines roared as it lurched backward, molten slag ejecting from its rear vents to confuse targeting systems. But it was too late. The Titan's wrath fired. A beam of pure, searing white energy lanced across the void, so bright it drowned out the stars. It struck the molten fist's forward shields, and for a heartbeat they held. Then they buckled. The beam carved through armor like a blade through flesh, molten metal spraying into the vacuum. Alarms blared, the ship's internal lights flickering as power conduits ruptured. Dralethian's spines flattened against his skull. This was not a war of honor. This was annihilation, and the humans had only just begun. The molten fist reeled, its hull groaning under the weight of the Titan's wrath's fury. Dralethian's claws dug into the command console, the metal warping beneath his grip as the ship's inertial dampeners struggled to compensate. Around him, the bridge crew scrambled, Dralethian warriors, bred for war, now moving with the frantic desperation of prey. Vashtor's voice cut through the chaos, sharp with disbelief. Their weapon. It shouldn't be possible. That output violates every known energy threshold. Dralethian didn't answer. His eyes remained locked on the tactical display where the human dreadnought loomed like a specter. Its armor was pockmarked from earlier skirmishes, yet it moved with eerie precision, its thrusters flaring in controlled bursts. No wasted motion, no hesitation. That was the first mistake the Dralethians had made. Assuming human ships would fight like theirs, Dralethian doctrine favored brute force, overwhelming firepower, the crushing weight of molten steel and plasma. But the humans, they fought like surgeons. A new alert flashed across the display. Secondary signatures detected. A subordinate rasped, multiple smaller vessels, moving to flank. Dralethian's spines twitched. He knew what was coming. The human strike craft were unlike anything in the Dralethian arsenal. Sleek, angular, their hulls coated in a matte, black composite that drank in sensor waves. They didn't charge. They slid through the void, silent as shadows. Dralethian targeting systems struggled to lock onto them. Their engines emitted no heat signature, no radiation trail. They moved like ghosts. They struck. Railgun rounds punched through the molten fist's weakened shields. Each impact precise, calculated. Not random barrages, but methodical dismantling. Targeting thruster arrays, shield emitters, weapon hardpoints. Dralethian's mandibles clenched. This was not the reckless, chaotic assault the Dralethians had expected. This was something far worse. Discipline. On the bridge of the Titan's wrath, Colonel Lisa Sullivan watched the engagement unfold with cold detachment. Her fingers traced the edge of her command console, the holographic display painting her face in flickering blue light. Flanking maneuver complete. Captain Mitchell Banks reported from the tactical station. His voice was calm, almost bored. Their starboard shields are down to Fey engines compromised. Sullivan nodded once. Execute silent protocol. Banks didn't hesitate. His fingers danced across the interface, inputting the command sequence that would send a single encrypted burst transmission to the strike craft. No fanfare, no warning, just death, delivered in perfect silence. The Dralethians never saw the kill shot coming. One moment, the molten fist was struggling to reorient, its remaining thrusters flaring as it attempted to bring its guns to bear. The next, a single torpedo, no larger than a Dralethian warrior, slipped through the fractured shields. It didn't explode. It unfolded. Tendrils of nanite, laced alloy spiraled outward, latching onto the hull like metallic parasites. Within seconds, they burrowed deep, seeking power conduits, data relays, life support nodes. Vashtor's scream of horror was cut short as the ship's internal systems screamed in protest. Lights died. Engines sputtered. The air grew thick with the acrid stench of melting circuits. Dralethian staggered as the deck lurched beneath him. His mind raced, clawing for a solution, a countermeasure. But there was none. This was not a weapon designed to destroy ships. It was designed to strangle them. On the Titan's wrath, Sullivan exhaled slowly. Target neutralized. Banks smirked. They really thought they could outgun us. Sullivan didn't answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the dying Dralethian vessel, its once proud hull now dark, lifeless. She had seen this before. Every species made the same mistake. They saw humanity's ferocity, its brutality, and assumed that was its strength. They never realized the truth. The real danger wasn't in how hard humans hit. It was in how precisely they aimed. The silence that followed the Titan's wrath strike was absolute. Dralethian's ship, the Molten Dawn, hung dead in the void. Its once glorious orange, red plasma conduits dimmed to embers. The vessel's segmented armor plating, forged in the orbital furnaces of Dralethian Prime, had been rendered useless, not by brute force, but by something far more insidious. A weapon that didn't just break shields, but unmade them. Inside the command nexus, Dralethian's claws dug into the console, his copper-hued plating vibrating with the aftershocks of the attack. His secondary heart thundered in his chest, a primal rhythm of disbelief. This was not war. This was execution. Across the ruined bridge, Vashdor's data slate clattered to the deck, its screen flickering with corrupted schematics. The scientist's voice was a whisper, raw with revelation. They didn't just disable us, they mapped us. Dralethian turned, his ocular membranes narrowing. Vashdor gestured weakly to the dead consoles. The pulse. It wasn't an EMP. It was a scanning algorithm. It tore through our systems, learned our architecture, our redundancies. His voice cracked. They knew where to hit us before they fired. A cold understanding settled in Dralethian's gut. Humans didn't fight blind, they studied. On the Titan's wrath, Colonel Lisa Sullivan watched the aftermath through the tactical display. The Dralethian ship was a corpse now, its molten core cooling, its weapon arrays dark. Captain Banks leaned against the holotable, arms crossed. "They'll call this dishonorable." Sullivan didn't look away from the screen. They always do. It was the same story every time. Aliens expected humanity to fight like beasts, to charge headlong into battle, to trade blow for blow in some grand theatrical clash of firepower. But humans had never fought fair. Not when the first caveman sharpened a stick, not when the first general flanked an enemy army, and certainly not now, when the stakes were extinction. Sullivan's fingers traced the edge of the display, pulling up the weapon's schematics. The Neural Scourge, a classified project, born from reverse-engineered Dralethian tech, refined with human precision. It didn't just disable, it learned, and what it learned, it exploited. Banks exhaled through his teeth. "Think they'll surrender?" Sullivan's answer was flat. No, Dralethians didn't surrender. They burned. Back on the Molten Dawn, Dralethian made his decision. His claws flicked across the emergency panel, activating the last reserves of power. The ship groaned, its dying systems protesting as the backup reactors flared to life. Vashdor's head snapped up. "What are you?" Dralethian didn't answer. His focus was on the tactical feed, on the human warship, hovering just beyond kill range. Too careful, too patient, a predator that refused to close in because they knew. Dralethian's mandibles flexed. Humans had studied his people, but his people had studied them. His claw slammed down on the ignition sequence. Deep within the Molten Dawn's carcass, the forge core, the ship's molten heart, shuddered awake. Vashdor's eyes widened in horror. "You'll kill us all." Dralethian's voice was iron. The core detonated, not as a weapon. As a signal, space rippled. On the Titan's wrath, alarms shrieked as the sensors overloaded. Banks staggered, grabbing the console. What the hell? Sullivan's blood turned to ice. She knew that energy signature. The Dralethians hadn't just accepted death. They had chosen it. And in doing so, they had lit a beacon. A call to war across the void. Hidden in the asteroid belt, dormant Dralethian battleships. Dozens of them flared to life, their forge cores igniting in unison. Orange-red plasma burned through the darkness. The trap had been sprung, and humanity, they had walked right into it. Sullivan's lips curled, a fight worth winning. The void shivered across the black expanse of the Sol system. Space itself seemed to distort, warping under the weight of something ancient and terrible waking from slumber. The Titan's wrath sensors screamed in protest, their readings spiking into incomprehensible red lines as the energy signature from the Molten Dawn's detonation rippled outward, not as destruction, but as a summons. Banks' fingers dug into the console, his knuckles white. "What the hell is that?" Sullivan didn't answer. She already knew. The Dralethians had not come to Sol alone. Their fleet had not been destroyed at Proxima. It had hidden. Now, it answered. Deep within the asteroid belt, where human patrols had scanned 1,000 times and found nothing, the rocks moved. Dozens of them. Hulking, angular monstrosities of dark metal and molten veins, their hulls segmented like the carapaces of some long-dead war beast. They had lain dormant for months. Their forge, cores cooled to near absolute zero, their energy signatures masked beneath layers of stealth plating and gravitational dampeners. Now, with the Molten Dawn's death cry echoing through the void, they awoke. Orange, red plasma flared within their cores, molten metal surging through conduits like blood through veins. Armor plating shifted, sliding into battle configurations. Weapon systems, brutal, industrial things, built not for elegance, but for annihilation, powered up with the deep resonant hum of a forge, stoked to infernal heat. The Ghost Fleet had waited. Now it hunted. On the bridge of the Titan's wrath, the tactical display updated in real time, the asteroid belt lighting up with hostile signatures. Multiple contacts, the sensor officer barked. 40, no 50. Confirmed Dralethian warships, class unknown. Banks' stomach dropped. 50 ships against one human battleship. Sullivan didn't flinch, she smiled. "Colonel," Banks started. "Quiet," she murmured. Her eyes locked on the screen. The Dralethians had played their hand. Now it was hers. The Ghost Fleet moved as one, their formations precise, their trajectories cutting off every possible escape vector. They didn't rush. They didn't charge. They advanced like molten steel flowing into a mold, inevitable and unstoppable. Draltel's last act had not been surrender. It had been sacrifice, and now his kin came to collect the debt. The lead Dralethian battleship, Iron Maw, pulsed its forge, core a deep resonant thrum that vibrated through space like the heartbeat of some primordial war. God. Its weapons locked onto the Titan's wrath, targeting solutions calculated with cold mechanical certainty. Humanity had dared to defy them. Now, they would learn the price of arrogance. Sullivan exhaled. "Open a channel." Banks blinked. To who? She didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her command console and input a code, one that had not been used in decades. A code that bypassed all standard protocols. A code that woke something older. The comms officer stiffened as the system accepted the authorization. "Colonel what?" Static hissed. Deep. Mechanical. Authorization confirmed. Awakening. Banks' blood ran cold, because that voice wasn't human, and whatever it belonged to, it was answering. Far beyond the asteroid belt, where no human ship had ventured in years, something stirred in the dark, something the Dralethians had never seen, something they had buried, and now, at Sullivan's call, it opened its eyes. The Ghost Fleet had come to kill, but humanity, they had brought worse. Section Fae, the dancing plague, the Dralethian command hub thrummed with molten energy, its copper-lined walls vibrating under the weight of 1,000 tactical readouts. High Commander Draltel stood motionless at the central holodisplay, his armored carapace reflecting the orange glow of the war map. The human fleet was a scattering of insignificant lights, small, fragile things, barely worth the effort of crushing. Something itched at the back of his neural clusters. A whisper of unease. Vashdor, his chief scientist, approached, his segmented limbs clicking against the deck. "High Commander, we have detected an anomaly." Draltel did not turn. Define anomaly. Vashdor hesitated. A rare thing for a Dralethian. A signal. Old, encrypted in a dialect we do not recognize. The war map flickered. A single point of light flared at the edge of the system. Then another. Then hundreds. Draltel's mandibles twitched. Explain. Vashdor's ocular lenses dilated, his internal processors scrambling for an answer that did not exist. They were not there before. The lights pulsed, not in formation, not in any pattern a Dralethian mind could parse. They danced. Aboard the Indomitable, Colonel Lisa Sullivan watched the same display with cold satisfaction. Banks stood beside her, his knuckles white around the grip of his sidearm. What the hell are those? Sullivan didn't answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, let the fear in his voice settle into the air like smoke. Then, softly, old friends. The Ghost Fleet was not a fleet at all. Not in the way the Dralethians understood. Humanity had learned long ago that war was not just about firepower. It was about psychology, about making the enemy see things that weren't there, about making them doubt the dancing lights were a relic of the First Solar War, a weapon so insidious, even the victors had locked it away. A swarm of autonomous drones, each no larger than a human fist, woven with stealth composites that drank in sensor waves and spat back lies. They didn't just hide, they mimicked. They took the shape of dreadnoughts on scanners, flickered in and out of reality like ghosts, and when the time was right, unleashed a single devastating strike before vanishing again. The Dralethians called it madness. Humans called it theater. Draltel's war room erupted in chaos. Multiple contacts bearing Fey by Fey. Energy signatures spiking, plasma torpedoes detected, shields buckling on the molten fist. Draltel snarled, his claws gouging into the command console. Return fire. All batteries. Full dispersal. The Dralethian fleet obeyed, their massive cannons roaring to life, filling the void with molten death. And the Ghost Fleet laughed, because every shot that connected hit nothing. The drones twisted around the blasts, their paths erratic, their movements unpredictable. They wove through the Dralethian formations like smoke, their signals flickering, their numbers changing with every scan. One moment, 100 ships, the next, 1,000 Vashdors. Voice was a rasp of static. High Commander, they are inside our systems. Draltel whirled. Impossible. But the holographic displays told the truth. The Ghost Fleet wasn't just attacking their ships, it was infecting them. Data streams corrupted, targeting arrays misfired, engines stuttered and died. And through it all, the dancing continued. Banks exhaled sharply. They're panicking. Sullivan nodded. The Dralethians were warriors. Yes, but they fought with logic, with brute force, with the certainty of their own superiority. This was chaos, and humanity had written the book. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper. The Ghost Fleet struck, not with missiles, not with guns, but with a single pulsing transmission. A data burst that slithered into every Dralethian comm channel, every screen, every mind. The voice that answered Sullivan's call, the thing that had slept in the dark. And the Dralethians heard it. Draltel staggered as the sound ripped through his neural feed. It was not a language, it was pain. It was the sound of a dying star, of metal screaming, of something alive in the circuits. His warriors collapsed, their systems overloading, their minds buckling under the assault. Vashdor writhed on the deck, his optics flashing crimson. Make it stop. But Draltel could not, because the humans had not just brought a weapon, they had brought fear, and fear, once planted, did not die easily. The dancing lights swarmed closer, and the Dralethians, for the first time in their proud history, knew what it meant to run. Section Fey. Chen's choice. The Dralethian fleet burned, not from plasma fire, not from kinetic bombardment, but from the inside. Draltel's command throne flickered with dying orange light as the neural assault carved through his warriors like a virus through flesh. The bridge of the molten will had become a charnel house of twitching bodies and sparking consoles, his crew reduced to shuddering wrecks, clutching their cranial implants. Even the ship itself groaned under the weight of the transmission, its molten core reactors pulsing erratically as if something foreign slithered through their veins. Vashdor's voice was a broken thing, his vocalizer glitching between terror and static. This is impossible." Dralethian did not answer. His gaze was locked on the viewport, where the void had become a nightmare. The human fleet had not moved, they did not need to, because the thing they had unleashed was not a weapon. It was alive. 3 cycles earlier, Colonel Lisa Sullivan stood in the dim glow of the Titan's Wrath's war room, her fingers tracing the edges of a data slate. The screen displayed a single name, glowing faintly in the dark project. Chen's Choice. Captain Mitchell Banks shifted beside her, his jaw tight. "You sure about this, Colonel?" Sullivan did not look up. No, the silence between them was thick, weighted with the unspoken truth of what they were about to do. Because Chen's Choice was not a weapon, it was a grave. The first transmission, the Dralethians had ignored the Treaty of Soul. They had burned human colonies, slaughtered civilians, laughed as their molten, edged warships carved through Earth's defenses like a blade through paper. They had believed humanity weak. They were wrong. The first transmission had been a whisper. A single pulsing burst of data slipped into the Dralethian command network. It was not a virus. It was an invitation. What slept beneath deep in the black, where no human ship had ever ventured. Something stirred. It had no name. It had no form. But it remembered. It remembered the taste of Dralethian arrogance, the sear of their plasma, the way their warriors had laughed as they glassed human worlds. And when the transmission reached it, when the humans asked, it answered. Draltel's claws dug into his throne as the sound tore through his skull. It was not a voice. It was hunger. The lights of his ship flickered, then died, plunging the bridge into darkness. Only the emergency glow of molten core conduits remained, casting long, jagged shadows across the deck. Then, movement. The shadows twisted. Vashdor screamed as the first tendril of darkness slithered from a shattered console, wrapping around his leg. It was not smoke, not energy. It was something else. Something that pulsed with a rhythm too close to a heartbeat. Draltel's neural feed screamed warnings, his implants overloading as the thing in the dark spoke again. This time, he understood it. "You should have honored the treaty." Chen's legacy, Mitchell exhaled slowly as the Titan's Wrath sensors registered the Dralethian fleet's collapse. "It worked," he muttered. Sullivan did not celebrate, because Chen's Choice had never been about victory. It had been about vengeance, and the thing they had woken would not stop with the Dralethians. It would remember, it would hunt, and humanity had just unleashed it upon the galaxy. The last light Draltel's final sight was not of the human fleet. It was of the dark, and the things that moved within it. The Dralethian command cruiser Kesha's fury listed in the void, its once proud angular hull, now a broken carcass bleeding molten plasma into the dark. The orange-red glow of its dying reactors pulsed weakly, casting jagged shadows across the ruined bridge. Draltel's remaining eye, the other a cauterized ruin from the human boarding drones, flickered with failing optics as he dragged himself across the deck. His carapace armor, once polished to a mirror sheen, was scorched black, its segmented plates cracked like dried riverbeds. He had commanded fleets. He had shattered worlds. Now he crawled. The neural feed in his skull spat static, the last of his officers' vitals, blinking out one by one. Vashdor had been the first to fall, his brilliant mind reduced to screaming as the human cyber. Warfare sweets burned through his implants, turning his thoughts to liquid fire. The others had followed, torn apart by the things the humans had unleashed, the things they had woken. Draltel's mandibles twitched in a silent snarl. The humans had not fought like warriors. They had fought like butchers. Their weapons did not simply kill, they unmade. Their boarding parties were not soldiers, but nightmares clad in blackened armor. Their movements too precise, too inhuman. And then there was the dark, the hunger in it. A shudder racked his body as the memory of that voice slithered through his mind again. You should have honored the treaty. The humans had warned them. The Treaty of Soul had been clear. Do not cross the line. The Dralethian High Command had laughed. Humanity was young, fractured, their technology crude compared to the forge, born might of the Dralethian Empire. They had not understood. The humans had not built their weapons to match the galaxy's standards. They had built them to break them. Dralethian's claws scraped against the deck as he hauled himself toward the flickering remains of the tactical display. The holographic projection sputtered, its fractured light painting the ruins of his fleet in jagged orange. Ships that had once darkened stars with their numbers now drifted in pieces, their molten cores cooling in the endless night. And among them, the Titan's wrath, the human dreadnought hung like a specter, its blackened hull untouched, its weapons silent. It did not gloat, it did not advance, it watched. Dralethian's remaining eye narrowed. That was the true horror of humanity. Not their weapons, not their savagery, but their patience. They had let the Dralethians come. They had let them believe in their own supremacy. And then they had shown them. A wet cough racked his body, ichor spattering the deck. His secondary heart had failed minutes ago. The third was slowing. He was dying. Not the groan of buckling metal, not the hiss of escaping atmosphere. Dralethian forced his head up, his vision swimming as a figure emerged from the smoke. Colonel Lisa Sullivan stood before him, her armor scarred but unbroken, her visor reflecting the dying light of his ship. She did not raise her weapon. She did not speak. She simply looked at him, and in that moment, Dralethian understood. This was not mercy. This was judgment. The last of his neural feed flickered, a final transmission from the dying empire he had served. High Command falls. The humans. They are not what we thought they are. The feed cut out. Sullivan turned away, her boots ringing against the deck as she walked back into the dark. Behind her, the Kesh's fury shuddered and died. Silence reclaimed the void, but the dark remembered, and it was hungry. Section Fey. The trial of soul, the dark remembered, and so did the survivors. Dralethian awoke in chains. Not the crude restraints of lesser species. No, these were human chains. A lattice of reinforced graphene, humming with suppressor fields, woven through the very bones of his wrists. His armor had been stripped away, leaving only the scorched remnants of his underlayers, the scent of burnt alloy clinging to his skin. The room around him was cold, sterile, a cell of polished black metal and recessed lighting that cast no shadows. He knew this place. The humans called it the Crucible, a tribunal for the defeated. Across from him, seated behind an angular obsidian bench, was Colonel Lisa Sullivan. Her uniform was clean now, her dark hair pulled back, her expression unreadable, but her eyes. Those were the same eyes that had watched him from the smoke as his ship died around him. To her left stood Captain Mitchell Banks, arms crossed, his cybernetic left hand flexing in silent rhythm. To her right, a holographic projection flickered. Vashdor, the Dralethian scientist, his once proud crest now limp, his molten, orange eyes dimmed by exhaustion. Dralethian's mandibles twitched. You kept him alive. Sullivan didn't blink. He surrendered. A low, grinding sound escaped Dralethian's throat. Surrendered, a word that had no true translation in the Dralethian war. Lexicon, to lay down arms was to invite annihilation. To show weakness was to be culled. Vashdor lived. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of unspoken accusations. Then, Sullivan leaned forward, her fingers interlacing. You ignored the Treaty of Soul. Dralethian exhaled, his secondary lungs venting heat. We burned it. A muscle twitched in Banks' jaw. Sullivan didn't react. You thought we were weak. We knew it. Draltel's voice was a rasp, the damage from the battle still raw in his vocal membranes. Your fleets were scattered. Your colonies, undefended, your technology. He paused, mandibles clicking. Primitive. A flicker of something passed over Sullivan's face. Not anger, not even contempt. She tapped a command into the console before her. The walls of the chamber dissolved, replaced by a star map, the Sol system, rendered in perfect, glowing detail. Then, the simulation began. Dralethian watched as the Dralethian armada descended upon Mars, their forged ships unleashing torrents of superheated plasma, their dreadnoughts carving through orbital defenses like blades through flesh. The trap sprang, hidden within the asteroid belt, dormant for decades. Human ships awoke. Not the blocky utilitarian vessels the Dralethians had studied, not the fragile carriers and outdated destroyers they had mocked in their intelligence briefings. These were new, sleek, silent. They moved like living things, their hulls shifting mid-combat, their weapons systems adapting in real time. Railguns fired not solid slugs, but self-forging projectiles that liquefied Dralethian armor on impact. Plasma lances curved, bending around shields to strike at weak points. The scorched earth protocols, Draltel's spines stiffened as he watched the recording. Human ships, crippled beyond repair, did not flee, did not surrender. They rammed. And when their reactors went critical, they didn't just explode. They unmade. Vashdor made a sound, a whimper, low and involuntary. Sullivan's voice cut through the silence. You thought we fought like you. She tilted her head. We don't. Draltel's claws dug into his own palms. The simulation continued. The Dralethian fleet, once an unstoppable tide, became a scattering of broken hulls and dying embers. The humans lost ships, dozens, hundreds. But for every one that fell, 3 more seemed to rise from the void itself. The final blow, a single transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, in perfect Dralethian battle, can't. You were warned. The simulation faded. Draltel's body felt hollow. Sullivan stood. You came to our home. You thought you understood war. She walked around the bench, stopping just before him. Now you will learn. She turned to Banks. Prep the shuttle. Banks nodded. Where's he going? Sullivan didn't take her eyes off Dralethian. The word hung in the air, heavy with implication. Dralethian understood. This was not mercy, this was message, and he was the messenger. The dark remembered. So would the Dralethian Empire. The shuttle bay was a cavern of cold metal and flickering orange light, the air thick with the scent of ionized plasma and hydraulic fluid. Dralethian stood motionless, his segmented armor plates shifting slightly with each measured breath. The humans had not bound him. They had not even armed their guards. That, more than anything, unsettled him. The Dralethian Empire had protocols for prisoners, chains, neural inhibitors, interrogation cells lined with searing, hot conduits. But the humans simply watched him, their expressions unreadable, their weapons holstered, as if his compliance was already assured, as if they knew he would obey. Colonel Sullivan stood at the ramp of the shuttle, her silhouette framed by the dim glow of the bay's overhead lights. She was not armored now, clad only in a black fatigue uniform, the insignia of Earth's combined defense forces stark against her shoulder. Draltel's mandibles twitched. She had not even deemed him worth armor. You have questions, she said. Not a guess, a statement. Draltel's claws flexed. He had many questions. How had they predicted the Dralethian fleet's maneuvers so perfectly? How had they concealed their true industrial capacity? How had they, but one burned hotter than the rest? Why? He rasped, the words scraping from his throat like fractured metal. Sullivan tilted her head slightly. Why what? Why show me this? His voice was low, edged with something he refused to name. You could have destroyed us. You should have, yet you let me live. You let me see. Sullivan exhaled, slow and deliberate. Then she stepped aside, gesturing to the shuttle's open hatch. Because, she said, we're not like you. Dralethian stared at her. She met his gaze without flinching. You came to our home expecting slaves. You found soldiers instead. But we don't fight for conquest. We don't fight for glory. Her voice hardened. We fight to end wars. A silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Then Sullivan turned, nodding to the pilot inside the shuttle. Captain Banks will take you to the jump point. From there, you'll be escorted back to Dralethian space. Dralethian's spine stiffened. You expect me to deliver your warning? Sullivan didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and withdrew a small data crystal, its surface etched with Terran script. She held it out. Not a warning, she said. Terms. Dralethian took it, his claws closing around the cool metal. Sullivan's gaze never wavered. Tell your high command what you saw here. Tell them the Treaty of Souls still stands. Tell them we remember. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And tell them the next time they cross our border. The bay's lighting flickered, casting her face in jagged shadows. There won't be a simulation. Dralethian's grip tightened on the crystal. He had seen the recordings. He had watched the human fleets rise like a storm, their weapons carving through Dralethian dreadnoughts, as if they were scrap metal. And worse, he had seen their eyes, not the fury of beasts, not the blind rage of lesser species, the cold, calculated resolve of predators who had learned, long ago, how to win. The shuttle's engines whined to life, the vibration thrumming through the deck. Banks stood at the controls, his expression unreadable. Dralethian hesitated. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped aboard. The hatch sealed behind him with a hiss of pressurized hydraulics. As the shuttle lifted off, Sullivan remained where she stood, watching until the craft vanished into the void. Somewhere beyond the stars, the Dralethian Empire still believed itself invincible. They would learn, and if they were wise, they would beg. The war ended not with a final battle, but with silence. Dralethian stood on the observation deck of the Iron Resolve, his claws resting against the reinforced glass. Below him, the molten, orange surface of Dralethian Prime churned, its forges cooling for the first time in centuries. The great foundry cities lay dormant, their towering spires no longer belching fire into the sky. The armadas that had once darkened the stars with their brutalist silhouettes were gone, shattered, surrendered, or fled into the void. And yet, the humans had not burned his world. That was what haunted him most. The Dralethian High Command had expected annihilation. They had prepared for it, fortified their core systems, readied their last desperate weapons. They had seen the human fleets carve through their defenses like a blade through flesh, had watched their dreadnoughts reduced to molten wreckage in minutes. But the humans had stopped, not out of mercy, out of calculation. Dralethian's mandibles twitched as he remembered the final transmission from the human admiral, a woman with eyes like frozen steel. You will stand down. You will disarm. You will submit to oversight. No grand speeches, no gloating, just cold, unshakable certainty. And the Dralethians, for the first time in their history, had obeyed. Vashdor found him later in the archives, surrounded by flickering holodisplays. The scientist's carapace was duller now, his once bright copper accents tarnished by stress and sleepless cycles. You're reviewing the old war simulations, Vashdor observed. Dralethian didn't look up. I'm reviewing our mistakes. The screens displayed battle after battle. Human ships outmaneuvering Dralethian dreadnoughts. Human soldiers surviving wounds that should have killed them. Human commanders adapting to tactics in seconds where Dralethian doctrine demanded hours. Vashdor exhaled, a hiss of steam escaping his vents. We thought they were reckless, unpredictable. Dralethian's claws tightened. We were wrong. The humans had not been reckless. They had been testing, Every skirmish, every retreat, every feigned weakness. All of it had been data, and when they finally struck in earnest, they had known exactly how to dismantle the Dralethian war machine. Vashdor hesitated. Do you think they'll ever trust us? Dralethian turned to the viewport again, where a human patrol cruiser drifted in high orbit, its sleek hull a stark contrast to the angular brutality of Dralethian design. No, he said softly, but they'll respect us if we earn it. On Earth, Colonel Lisa Sullivan stood in a quiet memorial hall, her fingers brushing the names engraved on the black marble wall. The dead of the treaty war, the price of peace. Behind her, Captain Banks waited, his stance relaxed, but his eyes sharp. They're calling it the Keeper Doctrine now, he said. Sullivan didn't turn. I know. The galaxy had a new name for humanity's strategy, the art of holding back just enough force to ensure compliance without sparking annihilation. Not conquerors, not liberators. Banks shifted. You think it'll last? Sullivan finally looked at him, her gaze as unreadable as ever. No, she said, but it'll buy time. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant, and somewhere among them, the Dralethians and every other species who had once dismissed humanity would remember. They would remember the fleets that could have burned their worlds. They would remember the soldiers who could have slaughtered their armies. And they would remember the one unshakable truth the Treaty of Soul had etched into the fabric of the galaxy. Ignore humanity's warnings, and they will make you beg.